Our next property type is the office property type. This is a property type that since COVID and the work from home trend has fallen out of disfavor with investors. There are many different types of offices, and the office developments are usually categorized either by class, building type and height, use and ownership, types of office space, and location. So in regard to the class of a building, again, this is going to hold true for all our property types. You're going to have a Class A, Class B, and Class C. Class A being best, Class C being the worst, sort of tired and less of an ideal location. It's important because each of the different geographies will have a different definition of what a Class A is, Class B and Class C. You need to understand how the market defines these different classes before you make an investment. The quality ratings are far from precise and vary depending upon local market standards. If you take a look at offices by building types, you have a couple of different building types. You have your typical office, which is a single structure, and the leases are the main. The leases inside the building are the main revenue stream. You can have an office condo, and again, that might just be one office suite or one office within a large building. You can have what's called a MOB, or a medical office building. This is where at least 75% of the structure includes tenants associated with the medical field. You can have something that's a mixed-use development. So maybe the bottom floor is retail, and then the 8 or 9 floors above it are office. This is what's called a mixed-use development. You can have a garden office, which is very similar to a garden-style apartments. They're low-rise structures. They're sort of typically clustered together in office parks. And a lot of the area in between the buildings is extensively landscaped. You can have flex space. These are 1 or 2 story buildings, usually located in a business park, that facilitate an office component combined with space for maybe either research or light industrial, and sometimes even warehouse uses. And lastly, you could have a secured compartmental information facility. These facilities have multiple feeds, security, and ventilation systems, and are highly secure, and usually what are called super adequate suites to the market. So there are things that are done or that are incorporated in the building that the normal office user wouldn't need, wouldn't use, and wouldn't pay for from a value perspective. Another way to look at offices is by building height. So you can have, again, this is very similar to apartments. You can have high rise, you can have a mid rise, and you can have a low rise. You can look at office buildings from ownership type. Is it a single tenant? So is there just one tenant in there, like maybe Amazon or IBM leases out the entire building? Or do you have multi-tenant structure? So there's a bunch of different tenants in one building. You can also classify buildings by location. You often hear people saying, oh, that's CBD office. CBD stands for Central Business District. And then you have stuff that's outside, typically suburban or beyond CBD. Neighborhood offices with suburban locations. So to talk about a few office specific terms, office space, the unit of measurement is per square foot or square foot. When you measure the different areas of a space for lease, you'll have gross area, rentable area, usable area. So gross area is the entire physical area of all the floor space in the building. And of course, you're measuring it by square feet. The rentable area is the area for which the rent can be charged. Generally, it is the gross area of the full floor less the area of all vertical penetrations, which include elevator shafts, stairwells, mechanical shafts, etc. Rentable area includes the tenant's premises plus an allocation of the common area directly benefiting the tenant, such as restrooms, first floor lobby, common corridors, mechanical and janitor's rooms, and the elevator lobby on the tenant's floor. And lastly is the usable area, and this is the secured area occupied exclusively by the tenant within the tenant's lease space. The usable area plus the tenant proportionate share of common area results in the rentable area, on which rent is charged. So shadow space is the last term you might hear with the office, and it's basically the difference between the vacant and the available space. Continue on with our office terms. When you're developing office, you want to be aware of what the FAR is, or the floor area ratio. This ratio is obtained by dividing the gross floor area of all buildings located upon a lot or a parcel of land by the total area of such lot or parcel. So zoning ordinances regularly prescribe maximum allowable FARs, as well as height and setback restrictions and parking requirements. This basically is the density restriction. So the larger FAR you have, the more dense your project can be, and typically the more profitable it's going to be. So that's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. In regards to leases, these vary by market to market and by building, but typically most leases are gross leases, whereby the owner pays operating costs and the real estate taxes up to a specific amount or a stop amount. In the United States, leases are typically for 5 years with renewals at market rates for a predetermined percentage of market rate. The length of the lease is often positively correlated to the amount of tenant improvements paid by the owner. A sublease, and this is something that you want to be aware of when you're doing your market analysis, because you want to know how much space is being offered on the market, not only that's vacant, but also that's subleased. So sublease is space that technically is leased, but vacant and available through the lessee. Lessees are typically willing to receive less than the market rate because they view it as an offset to the rent they are paying on space to the landlord. So if I'm a tenant and I lease 100 square feet and I figure out, oh my gosh, I only need 30, I'm going to put 7 back on the market. I'm going to try to sublease that 70. So it's the 30 that I'm using minus the 100 that I'm paying lease for. The 70 is what's going to be subleased. And again, since I'm having to pay rent on that full 100, any amount I can get to help me basically decrease that cost through a sublease, I'll take. Now, if you're the owner of the property, you don't like this because basically your space is, you are competing against your tenant, and the tenant has a different perspective. They're not out to maximize their profit on that unique space. They want to decrease their costs of the space that they're not using. So you want to be aware of what subleases are in the market and how much space from a sublease perspective is available. Lastly, you want to take a look at effective rent. Property owners sometimes use incentives like rent concessions to maintain the appearance of certain rent levels while effectively reducing their rent over a certain time. To be able to counteract that, you calculate what's an effective rent, and then you can compare that effective rent to other buildings' effective rents to get an indication of which building you might want to lease from. So tenant improvements are similar to what we talked about in the industrial section. These are basically improvements that the tenant makes to their space to make it their space. The landlord oftentimes will allow a TI allowance. They'll give the new tenant a certain amount of dollars to put towards making their space their own, or to make it look like they want to look. You also have to pay LCs or leasing commissions. So this is another significant expense and is paid to the leasing broker. Generally the owner, but sometimes the tenant pays a negotiated fixed fee or percentage of the entire lease amount to the broker. Longer leases tend to generate lower percentage commissions. For pro forma purposes, leasing commissions can also be reduced to a per square foot basis. The broker, however, tends to think of commissions in dollars. So from an operating perspective for office buildings, typical operating expenses include cleaning services, routine repairs, security, snow removal, common area maintenance or CAM, management fees, real estate expenses, and insurance. Utilities may be included or may be metered separately and billed directly to the tenant. And lastly, parking. This is important for any office building. The standard tenant requests 3 to 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of office space. Urban areas with access to mass transit may only have 1 space per 1,000 square feet. Local zoning ordinances may require more or less spaces. And our last slide on office terms is the term turnover. So in addition to assumed vacant spaces, several assumptions about turnover are required for pro forma projections. How many lease expirations will result in renewals? How long will it take to release the space? Will the owner have to give free rent for several months to attract a new tenant? All these assumptions impact the projected bottom line, and all will be affected by market conditions of the future. Build to suit and spec building, we talked about that in office, but those are basically different risk spectrums. When you develop an office building, if you build to suit, you already have the tenant with a signed lease, and there's no risk in not being able to generate a cash flow right after the property is finished. Whereas with speculative building, you don't have a tenant, and there is a risk that you get the building complete, and all of a sudden you can't lease the space, or it takes time to lease that building up.